So there's all sorts of videos on the YouTube saying greatest trellis, this is what you got to use, and all these sorts of things, and they tend to pride themselves on what they have without really giving a pros and cons, because it's ultimately you build something to fit your need, not particularly all in general everybody's need. And so I've done the beginner little trellis, that the tomato cage from the store. Those obviously do not work at all. I've gone into the Florida weave, which I pretty much just use for tomatoes. This is just going back and forth in between the two plants all the way down the line. So essentially if one goes one way, it supports it with the other one the other way. So it's a nice, easy, cheap way to essentially give support down your whole line. That works. It's a little more intensive than I would like, and especially when you get to a size like peppers, they work beautifully. But when you get to a size of tomatoes, when you're stringing back and forth all these things, it's just a huge pain, and just not something I truly think is sustainable for ours. So you have to remember, what I'm trying to get after is more of an urban farm. It's gone from a home garden and grew into something I'd like to expand on. So that's what you have to keep in mind. I'm certainly not commercial, certainly not trying to scale up to something crazy above beginner garden or home gardeners, and definitely well before a commercial gardener. So just keep in mind when you're looking at something like this, whether it's suitable for your purpose. That's what mine is going towards. So I'm going to show or tell you about the pros and cons of my experience with this sort of setup. Let's start with the pros. So the first, it's just cost efficient. I don't know how much a cage is, probably $5, $7, $8. This one cattle panel, which you get from Tractor Supply, 16 foot long, 50 inches up, is I think 22, 23 bucks. It's probably a little higher now with all the inflation. So you have this cage for, let's just say, 25 bucks, and you have 3 posts, and the posts are probably $5. So you have 15, about $40 of a trellis. And in this case, you can put, and this is me just being very intensive, 8 plants per cattle panel. So that is a lot of plant for $40. And it's not a cage where it's eventually just going to fall over or be kind of crappy. This is going to last for many of years. So from a cost perspective, you get a ton more bang for the buck of using the cattle panel with the post, and it just sits up there. And I will say it's sturdy as the next pro. When I first saw this, I didn't think, I knew it was going to be, if you did it right, by putting the cattle panel on top of the post and a zip tie, but I didn't think it would be this sturdy. So certainly once you have the plants on there, it gives more support into this, but it's essentially a blanket now. When you have big gusts of winds coming across, you essentially have the ability to push this over. This thing is strong as can be. It has not moved since day one. And if this was the rest of the life, it would probably be here for the next 50 years. So it's cost efficient and sturdy at the same time. You're certainly not going to get that from a tomato cage. Those tomato cages just fall over. They are garbage and they just do not work. You would need it to be supported by something else, and it's just a huge pain. This is also easy setup and maintenance. You put your post in the ground. It's probably a 2-person job. You can certainly do it 1 person. You put your post in the ground, put your cattle panel up, couple of zip ties per each one, and you're done, and you're just planting your tomatoes and you're good to go. When you go with the Florida weaving, you got to go layered. As the plant grows, you have to go with it. With these, you just interweave them in between the inner panels, and we also use these little clips. You can buy them off Amazon. It's like 400 of them for like 20 bucks. So all throughout this, you just latch it onto here, and it's work. As you go down, you trim, you pick, you put on another little clip for any sort of leader, and you're done with it. So in terms of maintenance, it's easy, it's straightforward, it's a 1-person job you can enjoy. When you're trying to weave in between intense gardening, it is a huge pain. And when it's up here, and how do you get to the 3rd row or the back row, it becomes an acrobat show, and it's a show that I just do not like doing at all. This has been, in terms of maintenance and working with, so incredibly easy than a cage and the Florida weave. So that is certainly a benefit. What else? The other thing is many different varieties. When you have a cage, you have an individual support, and you're only allowed to grow one thing inside of there if you truly want a good growth. But here, when you have a 16-foot panel, I have, in this case, it's just one variety, it's Cherokee Carbon, but you have the ability to have 8 different varieties on one panel. So not only is it cost efficient, it gives you the ability to look at many different tomato varieties to find that one that you truly like to grow and taste, and for whatever is your need. So you get to have that ability to grow a lot more in a very densely concentrated area with these panels. So I would say better than expected. Certainly there comes some reservations, but I would still highly recommend. I think the negatives are ultimately going to cause me to move on from it. From right now, simply looking at the evaluation stage and trying to find those varieties, it works incredibly well. Certainly the biggest issue with this is the height restriction. So heirlooms, beefsteaks, they'll eventually get to the top, but once you get into the true vine ones of your grape and cherry tomatoes, they essentially grow way too high for this and are going to fall over. So for those varieties that are incredibly tall, with your grape and cherry, or probably eventually the beefsteak, it becomes a height restriction because you can only do 50 inches per panel, and this is about 18 inches to 24 inches up in the air. So you only have about 6 feet up in the air, and then it just becomes a tower of it falling over all the time. We just clipped these up, but before this, all of this was in the middle of the walkway. Tomatoes, I will give them that. They are resilient. They will bend over and kind of look like they snap, but they'll just continue on to grow until they die at the end. But that becomes a real pain when you want to continue that grow. So from a height restriction point of view, cattle panels are not going to be the way to go. You certainly want to go with the hook and lean for that. Specifically in the instance of this, when you do intensive planting, you do have your leaders and you try to train them up, but ultimately you're going to have vegetation that is going to overlap between these two. So that's obviously, I don't have that much, which is great. Once you have disease on some of these leaves, it is just going to be transmitted to all of these. You can just modulate that by not having as intensely planted, but then you're not getting that bang for the buck. So because you're just trying to put them on a panel and there's going to be overlap, you have, and I try pruning them, but obviously they grow too big, you have overlap between the plants, and as soon as you get disease on one, it's just going to be transmitted to the all. So height's probably the second biggest con. I think the biggest con is simply the design itself. So it's two-dimensional. You only have growth going down the panel. You do not really have growth going here. So you trim and prune and clip onto the panels, but you're losing all of this space this way. So you don't have that cage, that full around that would support all that growth. So you have to do a lot more clipping off of that. You're truly missing out on a significant amount of productivity by having the restriction that there's no support in front or to the back. So three-dimensionally it goes down to a two-dimensional panel, and because of that, your productivity is restricted. That is why I'm saying it works for me now, because right now I'm just trying to find the varieties that I want to grow. So the beefsteaks, I'll do probably 30 to 40 varieties next year, knowing that the system kind of works. Until I find it, I'm not really, if I were to graft these or try to get a significant amount, it's just not going to work with this sort of setup. If I want to really get into the selling and giving, if it's just for you, just for the home gardener looking at different varieties where you're just picking them for yourself, it's certainly suitable. But if you want to scale up, this is not the way to go. Eventually I will break down these panels and make big cages out of them. But that's probably in 2 to 3 years until I find that. So it works, it's sturdy, it's cost efficient, and it works for your purpose if you're probably going to be a home gardener, and it will suit you for the next 30, 40, 50 years. If you want to get into larger scale production but not commercial, for the tall ones, you're going to want to do the hook and lean off like a greenhouse or something, those poles up top, so you can just keep supporting that sort of growth. And if you really want to get into the beefsteaks, those big bushy plants, you're going to really want to have a cage to support all around that growth rather than just down a line. So it works. I am pleasantly surprised by it, but eventually I will need to switch out just because my purpose is not to be a home gardener. So hope that that works for you and gives you a better understanding of whether this sort of system works for you.